Hi, everyone, and welcome to Roofless in Colloquium. We're excited to be here and to present the tutorial or rather demonstration. Well, maybe not, just sort of like seminar about values. We have a lot to present and we're just gonna go as fast as possible. But since we painted our pillows on Friday, I revised the notes that Jen, hi Jen.
Hi. Happy Tuesday.
Say that again?
I said happy Tuesday.
Yay. Yeah. I revised your notes and then there were so many good things, but I thought that values could be a good subject. So there is so much that we want to cover, but I just brought a few things. I brought two books and also I'm going to try to categorize things. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the different how to identify the structure of values when we paint or we draw. Number one, light source. Always identify it if you can. Try to unify it. Sometimes we have different light sources, but it's a good idea before you even lay your pencil or your paintbrush to identify the light source and try to find out as much as possible. Just guess if you're working uh, from a photograph, if it's artificial lighting, if it's outdoor lighting, if it's direct light, if it's indirect light, if it's diffuse studio lighting, flash photography, all those things are important. And sometimes even writing it down and just trying to guess or guesstimate, I guess. It's important in order to find out what kind of light quality you have. Direction, um, is very important in order to get the values or the structure of the values. And again, we're talking about things that will help us identify value structure on a form. And so another thing that I have right here, it's the shape of the areas of shadow and the shape of the areas of light. We don't really talk about that. We sort of like go and jump into it, but it's a good idea. And let me, I think what I'm going to do actually, I'm just going to share some of the images because perhaps it could be a good idea to just show this on the images that we used as inspiration. Let me just see if I can do that. Yeah, so this is the folder and I hope you guys can, yeah, you guys can see this. And, but yeah, for example, I'm going to use this sculpture, but source of light. So there is a clear, I would say, looking at the cast shadow and then the highlights. There's the source of light is from the light direction is from the side or behind the actual object because the cast shadow is in the front. So it's artificial lighting, it's direct lighting because we have a really hard edge on the cast shadow. So I think I got three things in regards of specifically the source of light. So the shape of areas of shadow and light. So sometimes we just go ahead and apply the value, but it's important to identify what kind of shape the shadows have. And what kind of relationship the shape, the size and the shape of the shadow has with the object, because sometimes we just apply the value but we don't think about the relationship between the actual shadow and the object that casts the shadow. Where is the shadow located? How large or small is the shadow in comparison to the surrounding area and the object? How does the shadow relate to other shadows in the composition? So I think that's also very important in order to harmonize and integrate the light direction in the values, the light direction in the scene. Same applies with the same thing applies to the areas of highlight or the areas that are lit that reflect or absorb the light. The size, the location, the relationship between that shape and size with the actual object, the relationship with other objects that may be in the photograph, I mean, or the scene. And let me see if I have a different example in that sense, because it's a little bit easier to identify when we have several objects naturally, but I don't see that happening here. Perhaps, yeah, no, I don't see. Maybe this painting, the one that I think the last one, the cast shadow of the baby on the pillow and the cast shadow of the pillow underneath the pillow. So we could just establish the relationship between them. We can just look at the size and the relationship between the size and the object um, that cause the cast shadow. So all those things are important in order to diversify or elevate, develop, and bring more attention to the light quality on the scene. Um, One advice or tip or suggestion in order to recognize or try to find a connection between the different shadows and highlights is to think about both groups as part of a puzzle, and each of the shapes and sizes becoming one of the puzzle pieces. So it's all interlocked, it's all related. As in a puzzle, you cannot just use the shape and try to squeeze it in a place that it doesn't belong. So it's not a bad idea to understand the light structure on a scene as if there were pieces of a puzzle. They need to lock, and they have their own specific position. Not everything goes. So yeah, just an advice or a tip or a suggestion in order to understand the light, not quality, the light structure. I'm talking about, again, uh, um, things, elements, and or categories that we can just think of in order to identify the value structure on a form, or on a scene or in a painting. So there's a tendency that we all have for many reasons. It's that we consider other things more important, to bypass or ignore the relationship between the shapes of light and the shapes of shadow on a painting. So those shapes respond to the light direction that I mentioned earlier. So it's very important to not overlook the relationship. Um, when you get the shape and the size of the highlights and shadows on a painting, you will bring about their relationship with the light direction. So that's how important this is. So a third element, I talked about light direction, I talked about the shape of areas of shadow and light. Another aspect is the variations within larger shapes or of value. So once you find those pieces, recognize that the light and the shadow within those areas, those puzzle pieces, may not be even or uniform. Usually there is a variation, a gradation, a rhythm of light. So yeah, it's very important to also remove another layer in that structure, or observing the structure. And once you place the shadows and the highlights, recognize that within those areas, there are variations. And in that sense, you guys, I just brought something. It's been a while that I didn't um, go over it. It's very art school basics. Oops, something's going on with the pointer. But yeah, these are the famous 6 divisions of shadow, of light and shadow. You can find this anywhere. But so what I wanted to bring up is the fact that light and shadow, it's not just a simple category of two, but traditionally, or in very orthodox terms, there is something called the six divisions of light and shadow that break down how the light reflects or potentially reflects on a surface and creates shadows. And they could be grouped together into maybe three categories, if you ask me. So the first two, highlight and light. So the area that contains the reflection of light has variations. And we can just categorize those variations into two main groups. Where is the highlight of that area and where is the light? So you can easily see here as in an example, or on an example, or yeah, in an example of a sphere illuminated by a source of light, how the quality is different. Again, what I'm just doing here is talking about the third element that would allow us to identify the value structure. And that third element, we talked about how variations within the shapes of lights and shadows. So two variations, main variations in the lit area. I would say there are two variations on the shaded area of the object, and you can find them here, the shadow and the core of the shadow. I would say maybe three, never mind, maybe three. Shadow, core of shadow, and reflected light. So there are three different categories or values on the actual object that are grouped together into three subcategories. The shadow is where the when the light ceases to reflect or transitions, I guess. Yeah. So when there's no more light or it ceases to reflect, the core of the shadow is the area that is clearly not illuminated. So it's the darkest part of the object. So when there's an object and the object is lit by a source of light, there's always one area of that object that's going to be the darkest, and that's considered the core shadow. I would call it the core shadow, core of shadow. Yeah, you can just call it like that, but the core shadow. But then a third quality, it's the reflected light of anything outside of the direct source of light that bounces against the shaded area of the object. So this is again very um, art school textbook. We don't have to go into memorizing these categories. I think eventually is important because even though we don't have to memorize it, this, I hope it serves as an example of how important value is in a painting, because we tend to just fly over these issues or these topics and simplify it a lot. But there is a high level of complexity in understanding that values have different qualities, and values are more important than color. So as long as we come out of this presentation understanding that values are much more complex than we thought and require much more level of observational practice and experience, then I think we could just take the next level. But so yeah, six, and you can make a note, you can find it online everywhere, the six divisions of light and shadow. So I mentioned the shadow, the one, the area that transitions from the illuminated part, or when the light ceases to exist on the side, on that part of the object. The core of shadow, the core shadow is the darkest area of the shadow, the non-illuminated area, and then the reflected light, there's a bounce of that light. So these three categories, you could assume that should be recognizable on anything you paint. So it's better to understand that we have to be able to find out where those are than just rely on pure observation. So I'm going to try to bring this topics up when we do paintings of subjects that are clearly a good representation or example of this. And finally, the cast shadow. The cast shadow as the last division of light. It's the shadow that reflects on a surface. So I want to bring, let me see if I can just stop this. And I have a couple of books about values that I got a while ago. This one, Jen, is it like a reverse when you see this? Does it show reverse?
Nope, it's perfect.
Okay, perfect. So this is Light and Shade, Anson K. Cross. I think that this is the best book I have about value. I mean, this is like really technical. I don't think you need it unless you want to really go bonkers about values. But I wanted to bring it up because there's an entire part of the book that talks about the 6 divisions, and you guys not only talks about the 6 divisions, but I just got this part right here because this chapter or area talks about the cast shadow. The cast shadow is the 6th division of light and values, and within the cast shadow there are many aspects to consider. So don't think like the 6 divisions is the only thing that you memorize when you go to art school. I mean, it's not like we had to have a test, but definitely these were things that were amplified or they were a focus in drawing classes and painting classes. So I'm just going to go briefly because each one has a specific paragraph. But yeah, the cast shadow generally is a strong dark, varies in value. So within the shape of the cast shadow, that we have mentioned that many times. So it's not the same value, it varies. Darker than light or shadow. So it's possibly one of the darkest areas in the entire composition, depending on the light direction, obviously, and the light quality. Varies in sharpness. So if it's outdoor lighting or one single point artificial light, the shape of the shadow will be all really sharp, but that varies depending on the light quality, obviously. So hides contours and detail, which means that on the shadow, we don't see details. Yeah, so it's just kind of like flat. It's just absence of light. Well, it just goes saying must be carefully drawn. I mean, this book is, when was this published? Published 1862, I think. No, let me see. Yeah, 1862. So yeah, whoa, wow. I didn't think, yeah, 1862. I think that was the first edition. Anyhow, I think it's still very much useful. Yeah, so anyhow, so 6th division alone of light and shadow has many specifications and things to consider. The most important for me is the fact that it has values or variations of value and also edge quality. But I'm not going to go into any more detail about that. And then what else I wanted to talk about? I think, yeah, again, 4 elements to identify the structure of value. And I just want to, let me just go back to this because I want to talk about once we can identify, we can also talk about intentional mood in a scene or light quality in the overall scene. And I brought this like 3 paintings to talk about chiaroscuro, which is the Italian word for light and shadow. And also it was part of the Renaissance trend of painting, or it was used in the Renaissance. Tenebrism, I brought another example, which is not really appreciated by art historians as a true movement or something to be specific about, but I just want to talk about it because I think it is significant. The difference between chiaroscuro and tenebrism. Tenebrism was more applied during the Baroque periods, the Italian, the Spanish Baroque, and then finally a couple more, low key and high key. But anyhow, going back to what I want to talk about, which is the use of value to establish a mood or an effect in your paintings. Um, so there are different effects or moods, and you could categorize in two, like one that has the dominance of shadows in the painting, and one that has the dominance of light in the painting. So tenebrism and chiaroscuro, this is an example of a still life. I really don't, when I just looked up the information of the painting, monogrammist VSZ. So I don't know if that's an artist or exactly. Yeah, I guess so. But that's a very interesting name for an artist. Still life with an apple, a peeled lemon, and a Roemer in a stone niche. Okay, so I just wanted to bring the idea of using a dark mood to create um, spotlight on objects, and how that could sometimes be a very effective way. I remember when we did the tournesols, the sunflowers, where I chose a very dark blue around the flower, and that sort of like worked. So chiaroscuro, it's used in the Renaissance. Caravaggio used it a lot. It's a high contrast, but also there's a dominance of shadows. And look at the gradation and the rhythm of the darker to lighter on the background, on the niche, to create the idea of hollowness. So look at also the cast shadows, especially the plate just stepping outside of the niche, and how they correlate between them. So I thought that this painting was really beautiful in that sense, and the transparency of the glass, and how that captures not only the background shadow, but also the point of reflection. We can guess that there's a window where the light floods in and reflects on the objects. Um, it's almost a mathematical painting in that sense, and a good example of chiaroscuro used as a trend and to create a mood. This is a painting by Francisco de Zurbarán, and we know about this painter because we have, Jen, you found this painting of a painter painting Christ in the cross. That just blew my mind. And we were talking about the Zorn palette, I believe, and you brought some examples. I don't know how that came about, but yeah, I remember that painting. So Francisco Zurbarán did a lot of still lifes, and this is considered chiaroscuro as well, heavily dark, but with a beautiful spotlight on the elements. Still life with pottery jars, 1635. And then I just copied an article at I think it was at The Guardian, I forgot, but it just beautifully explains how magical the light is on these objects, and how they feel almost illuminated from within, and how the artist created randomness by not making the objects equidistant. So each object has a different distance between them. And how not only that, but it seems like some objects are slightly pushed back and some are brought slightly forward. So there are different, very interesting descriptions on this article about how um, yeah, this is an extraordinary example of chiaroscuro, and an example of dark mood, and how it can create a very specific effect. And yeah, so it's let me see if I can find an excerpt, but it makes them tangibly solid. It makes them audibly solid the way they rendered. It makes you imagine the sound they'd make when the clay pot is put down on the shelf, when the brass cup is set in the thin silver platter. It's a level of realism you might well call magical. So, and I highly recommend, I put it here if you have the time. I highly recommend it because it's nice to read the description and then look at the painting. But I'm just going to move forward to an example of tenebrism. And again, there's this final paragraph saying that the term is somewhat vague and tends to be avoided by modern art historians. And it's vague because the difference between tenebrism and chiaroscuro, it's not that clear. Uh, some people argue that tenebrism is more of a trend or a stylistic application of chiaroscuro, and chiaroscuro is the actual technique of using heavily contrasted blacks or darks against values. But in tenebrism, there was a famous trend of people holding candles, and I just brought this amazing painting by Adam de Coster, A Man Singing by Candlelight. So I think it's so beautiful. And so I disagree with the art historians. I love tenebrism because I like this aspect of mood and style. I understand the distinction between technique and style. And to me, tenebrism, especially applied to Spanish Baroque, reminds me of church paintings and growing up and then seeing all these really moody, dark, scary paintings in churches. I mean, not these ones, obviously, but in other examples. So I just put a little bit of explanation of what it was and what it is, but I just wanted to bring that as an example in art history of a dark mood. And then finally, I don't have any light mood, but I could bring the painting from, I forgot the artist. Maybe this one, maybe not. It couldn't be because there's a dark background. But what was the name? Takanobu Kobayashi. If you Google this name, you're gonna find out that he used a lot of like high key values. So the difference between low key and high key, we usually apply to color. Low key colors are colors that are dark, and high key colors are colors that are pastel. But you could apply it to value. So low key having the absence of light, and it's usually applied or to create the effect of gloominess, mystery, drama, menace, heaviness, and all those sort of like dark aspects. Yeah, and high key values which I think we applied on the pillows, because most of the pillows had like shadows, but they were not very dark, very low key. So they create the effect of delicateness, cheerfulness, whimsy, heartedness. I think, yeah, heartedness. Yeah. So there is clearly mood. Values is not just about the first part of this presentation in which I explain how to identify them and then also how to break down um, the shapes of highlights and shadows, but it's also referred to a mood in the painting. So everything sort of like compounds. You have to look at the shadows and the values, you have to identify them, you have to recognize the light source, you have to find out the relationship between the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the highlights, try to find the different light divisions and value divisions between the lit areas and the shadow areas. And in addition to all of that, there has to be an intention behind the painting in which you express a mood or a feeling in the scene. So if you want something that it's much more cheerful or light or delicate or something that it's a little bit more heavy and dramatic and emotional. And an example of this, because I brought some classical examples, is that Sarah Jennings had to do a commission of a photograph using the photograph of a baby, and the photograph was really heavy. It was indoor lighting done at night, so artificial with a lot of darkness, no window coming, no light coming through the window at all, with with the face of the baby not showing. It was really, really dark. And sometimes we have to use the concept of mood in the scene to counterbalance things that we don't like. And I try to articulate to Sarah that there are things on the portrait of the baby that they were not very baby-like, and they created a really heavy scene. And I suggested to counterbalance that heaviness with bringing up more high key values, and it worked. It worked. The painted portrait was much more beautiful and whimsical than the actual photograph. And to me, that was an achievement in changing the mood of the light in a scene. So um, I'm so happy we're talking about this, and I'm not going to take more time, but I just wanted to say that there's so much more than what we talk about in the webinars that is important. And hopefully this will inspire you to do a little bit more research in regards to the complexity and the importance of values in a painting. Um, you have heard me say that values are more important than color. And it, it, I hope this presentation, sort of like between the lines, you can feel how that is. And finally, something that I wanted to bring up, and specifically as an example of, yeah, maybe this could be a good example of how to use darker values. Because with Julie's example, we talked about the use of black in shadows. And I just want to point out that use tints and shades of color rather than applying black. Two things. There's another book that I want to bring. I know I'm jumping, but this is another book that I have. It's much thinner, and it's also a classic light, shade, and shadow. E.L. Kohler, I think. Kohler or Collar, perhaps. I don't know. This was published first. It was published first in 1914. So again, another. Gosh, I don't know if I can find that. I just didn't put the mark. If this one was super technical, you don't want to get this one, because it will just make you want to run for the hills when you consider um, lights and shadows. I didn't even, I mean, I have it. I have like some I made some notes, but this is not it's not very fun. It's not a very fun read. Oh gosh, I cannot find it. Well, anyhow, I'll just explain it, because it just has to do about the use of tints and shades. So we have this idea that to make a shadow, we have to darken things with black. That may be the case, but remember the tutorials that we made about how to create tints and shades, and we did incorporate some black, but we incorporated some dark neutrals. So when you create a shadow, know two things. If you have a photograph, the color of the shadow in the photograph will be darker. And sometimes that just makes us feel like there's much more black in the mixture of paint than it actually is. So again, try to exercise, work out your observational muscles, because a tint is a lighter version of a color and a shade is a darker version of a color. So the trick or the idea is to identify the color of the surface where the cast shadow is, and then create a shade of it. It's not just applying black. Sometimes then we make a disconnect between the surface of the cast shadow and the actual shadow. And we end up turning the shadow into another object. So talking about the elements of composition, and now that instead of having like two focal points, the object and the surface. Now we have 3 focal points multiplied by whatever amount of objects you have in a painting, and that could get really crowded really fast. So I just wanted to mention that aspect, that local color should never lose its identity in an area of shadow. Local color should never lose its identity in an area of shadow. Example, the shadow on a red shirt should have some degree of red in it. It shouldn't be black. Other areas, we can just do a webinar, I mean, a demonstration for each of the divisions and subdivisions, but warm colors will be more brilliant when seen in warm lights. Not only, I mean, it's just going deep right now. It's not only now the light direction and the quality of light, but also the way the warm colors react under light and the cold colors react under light. Let me just put a stop to the presentation, and then perhaps we can just go into another demonstration maybe next week in regards to how to tips and notes about how to use color in shadows and highlights, because I think that deserves another demonstration. So 20 minutes is not 20 minutes. What am I talking about? 40 minutes. Oh, geez. Okay. So I'm going to stop this presentation, and then I'll thank you guys. Any questions, you can just put them on the comments below. Please follow us on YouTube and subscribe and leave us a comment. And I'm going to stop this presentation and we'll continue with critique.